everyone, I'm Vaidehi Tanvekar and I am the host of the Entrepreneurial Minds podcast. And today, for our very first episode, we have a really special guest, Joanna Bichsel. For those of you who don't know her, Joanna is the founder and CEO of Kasha, a digital retail platform optimized for women's health and self care products. So, welcome to the podcast, Joanna.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Excited to have you. Okay, so let's just dive right in. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and your journey to get here?
Sure. So my background, actually, I had a corporate life a corporate career before starting Kasha. So I never set out really to be an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurship kind of came up as I developed confidence, got frustrated with some of the kind of gaps I was seeing. So for me, my background's in tech. Well, I grew up in Canada. I have a computer science degree. I ended up working at Microsoft out of school. So the first part of my corporate career, I was an engineer. And then I was always curious, how do people use the products? So I moved into more like product management. I wanted to learn, how does the business side work? So I moved into business as well. And I just had many different roles across Microsoft at that time as well. I've always been interested in tech and emerging markets. So it was something I was doing kind of on the side throughout my career. And then basically I ended up getting offered to move to Gates Foundation. So I took that role and I worked on tech in global development area. And really Kasha developed over years. So over at least 4 years, the idea was growing. And basically, there were several kind of key triggers, I suppose, that made me question of, do I just keep going down this path, or do I actually prove that there's a different way? And so it wasn't with the drive to be an entrepreneur as much as it was to kind of like that something that there's a different way of doing it. And Kasha, really, when you look at it, our goal is to disrupt the global health industry. We want to turn global health supply chains upside down. We want to make them customer driven, data driven, reaching the last mile, and optimized for women. And it's why our business does what it does. And so that was the journey.
Awesome. And you mentioned you were at Microsoft, right, in the US. And Kasha developed in Rwanda. So can you tell us about that transition and what gave you the confidence to start something new in a completely new country that you hadn't potentially been to before?
Oh, I definitely, yeah. So I don't know how you start a business in a country if you've never been there or you've never worked there. So before starting Kasha, I was working on technology, mostly across East and West Africa. And South Asia as well. So I spent a lot of time in Kenya, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Liberia, India, and Bangladesh. And basically, I really knew East Africa especially. And when I thought about just the solution we're building, I knew it could work in East Africa, and especially Kenya and Rwanda. And that was the question, was really, where does it start? And for various reasons decided on Rwanda. I think if you're going to start I don't think you necessarily have to start in the largest market. There's this push that I often see, especially, and I think it's pretty investor-led, where you have to start in the biggest markets. And, there's a lot I didn't know. And so I didn't actually know a lot of people necessarily start in the largest market, but I did look at the largest. It just didn't make sense if you're just trying to test something out. And kind of removing some of these complexities and really focusing on the customer experience and customer solution and seeing, like, is there demand for this? Does this fit what people want? Well, do they use it? Do they come back? And so I think that's where I focused, knowing that enough of the kind of components are pretty transferable, even though it's different markets. So that's the reason I decided to start in Rwanda, and then we expand to Kenya and so on.
Awesome. And can you, for example, I am a user of Kasha. I go on the Kasha website. what does my experience look like? What makes it a unique experience compared to going onto another e-commerce website? Say?
So first, Kasha is, we started out as a direct-to-consumer e-commerce business. That's not the core of our business at this time, yet the whole goal and mission and vision of our company has not changed. So first, we ended up serving many different customer segments. So we served, high income, middle income, low income, across. And what we actually found through our business was most of the demand is coming actually from our lower income, traditionally offline customers. So most of our orders are actually placed over USSD. So people are not using the website. And so while we're e-commerce, we're really just digital retail and wholesale. So we found that at least within our market, the majority of the demand around the products we sell really comes from a typical offline customer. And then we notice shops in low-income communities are purchasing from us, and pharmacies now and others. And so we really decided to optimize for more of that lower income segment. We still have the website for various reasons, including to support some of the regulations around digital pharmacies. But for us, we really want to ensure that especially a lower income customer segment, which is where the demand is really coming from, has the health and household goods that they need and that they want. And so we've really built to optimize for that market, whereas just rather than, it's less of a e-commerce, more digital retail. How do you want to do that rather than here's the website side? So.
Sure. And you started like a direct-to-consumer business, right? And now you're also in the B2B kind of space. How has that played out? Do you see the B2B market is much bigger than it is the direct-to-consumer?
Well, so it was not deliberate necessarily. We started out with a direct-to-consumer, and then we noticed these orders coming in that were much larger than what a consumer could purchase in our primary customer segment. And we were like, what's this? Because they're ordering retail pricing. And so we investigated, and we found shops are purchasing from us. And we were like, wow, that's sure, if they want to buy our retail prices. And then we so we didn't stop it. We allowed it, right? And what we found is that grew exponentially. There was so much demand within that. And what we found is that in general, consumers tend to like to go into the local shops, right? Especially this lower income consumer, they trust their local corner shop or their local chemist. And so to buy digitally, it's usually for those products they're really embarrassed about. So most of our consumer orders really are around emergency contraceptives, HIV self-tests, pregnancy tests. But then we noticed the pharmacies and the dukas are purchasing a much larger variety. And so we basically just went with it. And I would say this is kind of a key learning I've had in entrepreneurship, which is like follow the money. If you're too focused on this is exactly what we will do, especially in those early days, you can lose the opportunity for a high revenue growth business. And for sure today, after years of doing this, I know that the B2B space is a much larger space. And in East Africa, at least, the direct-to-consumer digital market is just not there yet at high volume. So we do both, but and there's different use cases for those two different customer segments.
Awesome. And just on the point of following the money, right? You have a target consumer, and it's all females typically, because you're optimizing for women products. We are seeing now trends that men are starting to embrace self-care and starting to embrace skincare. Have you seen similar types of trends, and how did you still stay intentional of being this like women-focused brand?
So first, we are not women only. We sell, most of our customers are women, for sure, majority of them. But we sell to all genders, and we sell to consumers and to resellers and wholesalers. But we've always optimized for women. And it's always been a very obvious business opportunity for us. And so women are the most influential customer you can optimize for in the health space. They have more health needs than anybody throughout the course of their lives. They are the decision makers for health in the family. They bring the babies into the clinics, for example. They unlock the rest of the population. If you're a health company and you're not optimizing for women, that you don't know who your most influential customer is. So, but it doesn't mean we don't serve others, but we know that's the most optimal for us. And so for example, we've always optimized around things like sexual health. We know that's an area of need. Things around even like postpartum, there are various things women go through. Women menstruate every month for over 40 years. Each woman goes through that. So making sure that women have a wide variety of menstrual care products, and then we have health tech services around it. So just around women's health needs, we really have optimized for that. And that's, and what we find as well is even, for example, our pharmacy customers, many of them are women. These are women-owned customers. Many of the Dukas we served are women-owned businesses. And so it's just worked for us. We've had a very, exponential high revenue growth year over year. So I think there's something to be said about optimizing for women. And I don't think you have to be exclusive only to women, but any business should optimize for their target customer.
Yeah. And how do you target these women in the low-income households as well?
I think for us, it always has to come back to really understanding customer needs and understanding how best to serve them. And so for us, and a lot of Kasha has really grown over customer demand. So we first started with a smaller smaller set of products in a sense. We've never wanted to be like sexual health products only, like contraceptives, because that creates a very stigmatized product. So just knowing that, just building a brand which is very accessible to all, which doesn't have any stigma, but yet they can get those kind of products they need. So we've always had a variety of products, but then women told us that, you can't serve me without serving my baby. I need diapers. I need these other products. Why don't you put those on? And then, why can't I buy cleaning products from you? Why can't I buy rice from you? And so our categories have definitely expanded based on what our customers want and the target customer. It doesn't mean we're going to have all the household products or all of these other, but it means we'll have the ones that our target customer wants the most. So I think it does come back to the needs and how do people want to order, and how do you serve them best. And I think that's the most wonderful thing about running a business is you're serving your customer, and if you serve them well, they'll come back, and that's value. And if you're creating value, your business will grow. And so I think that's just that kind of simple way is how we've done it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the key lesson here is just being really close to your customers, right? Always getting feedback from them. And that's the only way they're constantly coming back to what you have.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears a little. You mentioned you started in Rwanda, right? And starting in the largest market is not important. Sometimes it helps to start in a small market, learn, and then expand to these other bigger markets. So Rwanda has a third of the population of Kenya and South Africa as well. And I believe Kenya and South Africa were the markets that you expanded to, right? So what made you make that decision? Why Kenya? Why South Africa? How were you deciding on what markets to expand to?
Yeah, I think when a business starts out, it's so much dependent, or at least maybe this is my experience, it's dependent on what you know, right? Like I was really involved in health supply chains in Rwanda and Kenya. And I knew that space in a way. There's a lot I didn't know in running a business, but basically, I think for us, for me, it was just very natural to expand into Kenya. Technically, I had done more work in Kenya than Rwanda, even from starting. And so I knew at least how it would work. I knew the partners we would work with. I knew the technology providers we would tap into. So it's like just knowing how to do it, I think is a key driver. And then really in terms of further expansion, I mean, we're in the health space, and HIV is when you look at total global health spend, the largest, 80% of that is HIV and vaccines. And HIV is a huge area of global health budgets. And we also have an enterprise part of our business. South Africa has the largest burden of HIV in the world in any other country. And so it is a strategic market for us. It is more developed, but there's still millions and millions of people that are not served with just getting their HIV medication, other things. And Kasha does deliver ARVs and other HIV products. So for us, like the first few markets were basically like, from a founder perspective, this is what we know. And then it expanded more strategically. But I have to say, not to discount these smaller markets, Rwanda for us is a very big business right now. And in these smaller markets, you can actually build a much more efficient business that gets the economies of scale much better. So because maybe there's less competition, you don't need to spend as much money in marketing. For us, we grew with word of mouth. Yeah. And then if you look beside Rwanda, DRC has over 100 million people. Sure. It's a much larger market than South Africa or Kenya if you look at just like the population size. And so we're able to we've even expanded outside of that into cross-border sales. So I think, just the market itself, a tier 2 market or tier 3 market you can grow a larger business than in many of these tier 1 markets.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And just to add on to that, I think also when you made the decision of expanding to Kenya and South Africa, you knew the Kenyan market, you said, but you didn't know the South African market. So correct. Was it you getting into the South African market yourself and building relationships before you fully launched? How did that kind of journey work out for you?
Yeah. So as a company grows, in a good way, it becomes less and less about what you know and what your skills are. Sure. And those kind of and I see this with our business too. The things I'm not so good at is the areas where we've been weak. Right. And that has to change obviously as companies grow. And then it's really around team. So our chief growth officer is in South Africa. And, we're also opening up Nigeria. Our chief operating officer has significant experience in Nigeria and has lived there for many years. And so there's nothing, it's critically important to know the market, especially in this continent. You have to know the markets. But it doesn't mean that the founder or CEO has to know every single market. But building a strong team with the experience you need is absolutely critical. I think it's very hard to make assumptions on markets based on data. The data out there is usually wrong. There's a lot of complexities that you just never know. Trust is a huge factor, huge factor. So that was a key point for us we are not starting Nigeria until we have someone in the team who has deep roots knowledge in Nigeria with partners we can trust. So, and same with other countries as well. So that's kind of basically the knowledge within the team grew, but I had to purposely grow that as well.
Sure. And when I think it's really easy to kind of say, I have this model that's working in one African country and I can take it to the next one, right? But there is a lot of tweaking that you need or customization that you need also based on a certain type of market. So can you give me an example of maybe what worked in Rwanda that you could have probably taken to South Africa and Kenya, but then didn't work or had to change based on the market that you were in?
Yeah. So, the way I see it, there's this reference model. This is everything it takes to run Kasha. But then do we need to do that ourselves in every country? Every country is so different. So in Rwanda, when we started, we tried outsourcing our supply chain, our warehousing, our distribution. And really, it's a less developed market. So there weren't as many players for us to outsource to. It wasn't cost efficient. So we ended up doing it ourselves. And then when we expand to Kenya, Kenya has so many 3PL, so much distribution going to every county every day. It makes no sense for us to do it ourselves. So, and also the customer base is different. Our Kasha agents are different. So there's different demographics, different like mobile phone usage, different payment options. And so it's critically important to tweak. I think one of the hardest questions around expansion across Africa as well is, what do you do yourself and what do you outsource?
Right.
And it can be very, very expensive to do everything yourself, very expensive and very slow. But then if you outsource too much, the quality in your customer experience can really suffer. And I think this is hard, and every company deals with that. But in the end, if you're not serving the customer well, your business will not grow.
Right.
And that's the most important part. And so bringing it back down to what does this customer need in this country, and they're understanding their unique needs is, I think, the most important piece.
Yeah. And I think that also then ties down to having that deep-rooted expertise in that particular country.
For sure.
Awesome. Going a little bit now back to your early days, I know you had mentioned you had a co-founder that you were working with. So can you tell us a little bit about how you found your co-founder and how you decided to start working together?
Sure. My co-founder originally, we knew each other before. I wasn't really looking for co-founder, so it's not, I know that now, like, I do see a lot of people looking, like they must have a co-founder, looking for a co-founder. I was not necessarily in that realm, but there's somebody that I used to work with previously who I had kept in touch with. We had a lot of similarities. And when I mentioned to her, I'm going to start this company, she's like, I want to join you. And that's basically how it started.
Right.
I think there's a lot of talk about having to have co-founders. I think that can be very helpful for some people or sometimes not. I don't think it's required necessarily. The other thing is, the companies grow and change and people's roles grow and change.
Right.
And people who are well suited in early stages of a startup are not, as well suited once a company has like 200 people and is, operating more like a machine so there's different personality types, and there's also what people just personally want in their life.
Right.
And that obviously that changes over the years. So I think, I think for me, it was really a very positive experience to be able to partner with someone through it.
Sure.
The problem is when you start a company, you have to know everything.
Right.
And I don't have a background in finance. Like, I've managed P&Ls, but I can't put a P&L together and put a financial model. And luckily my co-founder had a finance background. So there's an incredible amount of value to be able to come together with your strengths. So I think that's where co-founders are really helpful, for example.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Just having those complementary skills so you can fit well together. And I know you and your co-founder also parted ways. So what was that like? How did that kind of change the trajectory of the company, and why did you end up parting ways?
Yeah, well, first of all, she still to this day, she's one of my closest friends after my husband, I'd say, for example, in terms of, the depth of our conversations and honesty and just being a true friend. Right. But I do think, just for various personal things for her, it really depends on your type of business. She was never able to really live here in this region, and that's really hard when you run a business here. And so there are various kind of just personal factors that didn't lead to that. So now she's still a thought partner in various ways, but not necessarily in the day-to-day of the business, and that works out actually for both of us. So
amazing. Okay, it's glad that you guys still have a great relationship. Sure. Did you ever find after that investor pressure to find a new co-founder or find?
I find investors who are not experienced tend to be concerned about these things, because when I would talk to investors who were very experienced, and also if they also had operator experience, they know it's very natural for maybe the initial founding group evolves over time and is not necessarily fit for purpose at a later stage. And so it wasn't even a question or an issue. some of the more inexperienced investors would be very concerned because of, some assumptions that are made around that and the look of it all.
Right.
But so that's kind of, in a way, I think as a founder, you'll get a lot of flack either way across various things, and do what's right for you and do what you know is right, because no one knows your business the way you do. And you can also see this. I mean, it can be a flag for whether the investor is a right fit for you and for the company. And so, interestingly, the investors that were worried about that have not performed as well as the other investors when I look at them over the years.
Right.
So I think there's, do what's right, feels right in your gut.
And I think you said a really great thing about making sure the investor is a right fit, right? Oftentimes founders forget it's a two-way process. How do you do your due diligence on the investors?
Yeah, this is something I never paid attention to at the beginning. And, raising money in this market is so hard.
Right.
I've never felt necessarily like you're in a position of power.
Right.
And often you're desperate, right? And
Right.
so at the beginning, it was less of an issue. But then, I've been running this company now 7.5 years. And you get burned. You get very burned over those years with some choices made. And then you start to smarten up. And so now it's very different. For example, the lead investor in our Series B, I talked to 8 of their portfolio companies. I talked to each of those founders and asked, what's it like to work with this investor? How does this investor act on your board? How do they act when things go bad? And because that matters to me, because investors can make your life a living hell, or they can literally help you through the tough times. They can help you get to the next level. And so to me, it is important, but it wasn't at the beginning, and you kind of have to get burned until you realize it's critically important.
Yeah. Can you talk about maybe an investor or an investor relationship that was really positive, and how they added value to you and you realized, oh, this is the type of investor I want to have, versus the contrary?
Yeah. I brought on, actually it's kind of an angel investor, but a very high net worth individual. And they've, I think, been part of our board for about 1.5 years now, so relatively new. But I realized, through this journey, I would really love to have an investor that's also an operator, someone who knows what it takes to run a company. And it was a gift that I was introduced to this person. And I think for me right now, that is the most valuable investor. Someone who has been there, done that, been ahead of me. So this person has built and grown billion-dollar businesses, had them IPO, had them exit various ways, is very purpose-driven. And I don't have to explain very much to him. I just, he gets it, he knows immediately, but he can also serve as, a mentor in many ways. And then doesn't freak out if things are not, things go wrong in one area, and understands that a close relationship and trusting the team is the most valuable thing there is. I also very much value VCs, but the personality of the people and their values is really important to me as well. But just having, for example, we have one VC which has experience of companies scaling across Africa. That's exactly the type of experience I want on our cap table and on our board. So that's also very valuable, although different.
Awesome. Yeah, and just on the topic of fundraising, I know Kasha has raised $28 million throughout the 7 years, I guess. And then your latest round of funding was $21 million, which was a Series B. So you have a great share of experience fundraising, right? Does it get easier over time, do you think?
Absolutely. It absolutely does, only because your business grows, basically. The hardest thing is when you have an idea and you have no data at all. Like you just haven't started, or, that's the hardest place to be, because in this market, you have to prove everything. And and no one really cares about your idea. They care about whether you execute. And it's a good point, right? Like you have to prove yourself every single day. But, you know, we started with angel investors. We started in Rwanda, so most of the investors there were impact investors. We went to impact investors, local VCs. We went to, we had corporate strategic investors, DFIs, venture capitalists. We've had all kinds of investors, and it was quite a journey, and I didn't know at all what I was doing at the beginning. I made so many mistakes. I wasted so much time. But I think the most important factor in being a founder CEO is resilience and like figuring it out. You have to figure it out. You have to adjust fast. You have to find a way. And so eventually I figured it out. I think in Africa, it's still very nascent. There's now more investors in the seed stage. It gets harder also as you get older. There's also a gap. So once you're at like Series B, there's very few investors that can do that level of ticket sizes here.
Right.
So you have a pretty small pool. And then the next level is quite a jump. And you're just not there yet. You don't want to raise that much money, for example, or get to that level of more mature company investors. And so, but it is what it is. Our job as entrepreneurs is to grow strong businesses. So we help build the ecosystem as proof points. It definitely gets easier, but you still get the same stresses you have that you had in those early days of trying to survive will continue to exist.
Right.
So,
yeah. And I guess the other thing, just to follow up on that, is, again, you spent, after the 2 years, you were a solo founder, right? Like you were by yourself. And I think as founders, it's super difficult to take a back seat from the day-to-day operations or, being involved in the business, whereas fundraising is a full-time job, right? So when you're fundraising, it becomes really challenging to fundraise and manage the business. So you really have to take a step back. How were you able to do that, and how did you build a team that you could trust so you could take a step back and go fundraise?
Yeah, it's amazing how much time. That's something you never think when you start a company, that you're going to spend so much of your time fundraising. And that is the hardest part. And it's something, and most CEOs, I would think, in this continent are pretty operational.
Right.
So you are, from the early days, you are every role and you're fundraising. And so you just have to do it, especially at the beginning when you have no time. Knowing your biggest, or at least I feel the biggest lever I have to closing an investor is my results. And so showing like business growth, revenue growth, customer traction is absolutely critical. That is going to strengthen your story for sure with investors.
Right.
But as soon as, as you get more and more money over time, it's not sustainable at some point to do that. And I have made decisions and choices where, you realize you can't, if you're spending so much time running the business, you just cannot fundraise.
Right.
And so you have to find a way to bring in experienced people who you trust to hand it off to, so you can go out fundraising. And then you have to be disciplined enough to put in the calendar and say, I will spend this many hours, because the more time you spend on just focused on fundraising, the faster it will go.
Right.
So, and I know, I'm sure all founders do this. I do this for sure. I basically shoot myself in the foot by not spending enough time fundraising, and then things take longer. And so it's hard, but you got to do what you got to do. And
Yeah. And I think just a final question then after that is, we talked about how much you've raised, right? And it's obviously a great amount with your latest Series B round, but you've also had a tough time as an entrepreneur. Like, things have gotten hard. I spoke to you some point previously, and you mentioned how you had to take help from your parents to pay your kids' school fees. So there are really tough times like that. How did you go through that, and what made you still continue wanting to build Kasha despite going through those tough days?
Yes, this company ages me tremendously. Just the level, especially during fundraisers.
Right.
I mean, it's like deep stress that it's really hard for anyone to understand the scenario, because you often like can't share all your stresses either. For me, I mean, it depends for different people. I'm not a super social person, so I'm not somebody who has a huge community of people I go and talk with. I more have like a few people I trust, in a sense. My husband, for me, has been the biggest support system.
Right.
And I think for any female founder who's also a mother, it's incredibly important to have a supportive partner. Which unfortunately it's not as common on this continent to have, like, you know, house husbands and things like that, and which is much more common in other places. And it doesn't have to be a husband.
Sure.
It can literally be you have the best nanny in the world, or you have the most supportive parents, or whatever it is. But yeah, I think it is not possible always to be perfect in every part of your life. And so for me, my husband has been not just in terms of, you know, being the most supportive and being a lead for the family, but also someone I can confide in and trust. And, you know, someone I appreciate who will just tell me what they think and is not going to pretty it up, is going to tell me honestly. And even though, you know, he doesn't know what it's like, I know in every way he fully supports me. So that's been, and then also now, for example, having, you know, investors that are also operators, I can go to them and say, this is my situation, knowing they fully get it. And that's helpful, because at some point, especially, and this was during my Series B, just realizing I don't want to be alone on this anymore. I'm, you know, it's too much. And it was also a deliberate move that, you know, I really want to focus on ensuring our C-level team, is a very tight-knit team.
Right.
We share the load, we share the stress. Even though I'm the only one fundraising, well, with the CFO and others, like, let's share all of our stresses, because it eases our burden. And it's something I didn't do at the beginning. It was all like I'd hold all the stress inside.
Right.
And it depends if you have the people you can trust to do it. But you need to get it, because the burden becomes heavier and heavier.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get better. It doesn't get better. There's always new problems. So, yeah.
Awesome, I get that. Yeah, having that personal support system is so important. Perfect. Well, I think it's time to close our conversation, but this was super helpful, very insightful. I hope our listeners loved it. I'm sure they did. And thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today, Joanna.
Thank you so
Appreciate
much.
it. Thank you.